So right now, I would like to welcome Kun Sawit Trisirisatayawong, founder of ALES Lab.
ได้ครับใช่โอเค thank you hi Sawit so maybe quick introduction yourself what you're doing now and maybe a bit of like background so we know more about you.
Yeah, so I'm Sawit, right? You can call me Tan. I joined Web3, I think, back in 2020, early 2020, by joining Band Protocol as like a junior software engineer, right? So was working on the full stack from front end to back end to writing the chain code. And throughout that time, I kind of slowly shift towards the more integration side, the more business side of things, and starting to talk to partners, reach out to potential customers and other chains to see if they would be interested in using our product. And that's how I kind of got initially exposed to crypto and the community and the different people that are within it as a whole. And on the side, I was also kind of start to contribute to different projects, writing documentation for Yearn, built I think the first and the most used front end for Andre Cronje's on-chain gaming, a Rarity project. And as well that helped write contracts here and there and just try to be part of the community as much as possible. And I think at the end of 2020, at the beginning of 2021, start talking to Terra more, seeing Mirror launch with Band being like the main oracle for the platform, right? And then Anchor and then all the other community projects that launched afterwards. And I just personally got really interested in the ecosystem. So eventually decided to leave Band and do a project on my own. So that eventually becomes what was Nebula Protocol, right? We were an index protocol or an asset management protocol. And we were backed by the likes of Jump Crypto, Dragonfly, and as well as Terraform Labs themselves. And we were technically supposed to launch on, I think, May 10th. At 2 hours after UST started to depeg. So that never really happened. And then afterwards, we kind of brainstormed things here and there for a couple of months, and then end up, deciding to do ALES Labs, and specifically Selatone, which I think we'll be going into more detail about.
Yeah, so actually before going into more details maybe can you explain what is Selatone a bit?
Yeah, so the initial idea for Selatone was to be mainly a development tool for smart contract developers, right? Specifically for Wasm developers, which is the primary smart contract language and framework for Cosmos chains. But since we have launched, I think a couple of months ago, we have kind of slowly expanded to be more of like a Explorer as a service and basically a tooling as a service product and team. And now we are starting to expand to other ecosystem, right? We initially launched on Osmosis in February, but now talking to other smart contract platforms and even upcoming chains on the ecosystem in terms of how we can be able to support the work that they are doing.
Okay, cool. So we can go into more product detail later on, but I just want to ask with some kind of like decision point kind of questions, right? First one is about employee versus founder. You work in different places before in like protocols and Web3 stuff, right? And I think you are probably one of the most like got recruited person that I know from like different platforms, different chains and so on. Given all those opportunities, why decided to become a founder and not employee in some other protocols and chains?
I think there's a couple of parts to that. The first one is, personally, I always wanted to do a product on my own, right? To kind of have a vision of what I want to build, what would be useful for people, and actually try to execute on it just to see, what that's like, and try to make things that are actually useful and meaningful for people. So I think being independent and being a founder there kind of get me to that point better. And the other one is I also think that it allows me more flexibility and more freedom in being able to do actually what I think is actually gonna make the most impact, and also what I think is the correct direction without having to be restricted by, other people's, let's say, direction or mandates or stuff like that.
I see. And how big is your team right now?
We are 10 people right now.
Okay. And you have not fundraised?
Yep.
So
Yes.
bootstrapping.
Yep.
Okay. How do you manage that?
So right now we're mainly, so a lot of both myself and some other team members kind of shift, and initially when we pivoted from Nebula to doing RLS and doing Celaton, right? But now once we have launched a product a couple months ago, we have started to work with other teams in supporting their chain, we have begun to receive either grants or agreements or contracts or deals to kind of provide our service. And going forward, I think that will be our main source of revenue, at least for this product specifically.
I see. And just a disclaimer: I work for a VC, but I'm not here to sell everyone. You should fundraise, right? So there are projects that make sense to fundraise, and there are projects that if founders decide not to fundraise, there are other ways, right? And I think you mentioned grants, working with chains and so on. So that's also another way where you can also keep the lights on and also validate, right? That's also a way where you can validate that your product makes sense or is useful to people. Yeah, and likewise, like Poom, if you have any questions in between, please feel free to just jump in. Yeah, so can you, maybe jumping back into products, can you talk a bit more of the product, right? It's a block explorer focused on for developers right now. Right. What's the plan after this? Are you going to focus on being a developer tools, or are you going to expand?
So I think we'll definitely keep the developer podcast side, right? Since that's our main niche or our main competitive advantage over other explorers or block explorers in Cosmos. But just for us to be a bit more flexible and for us to kind of capture the larger market, since I think one of the main, disadvantages or the one main key point of Cosmos compared to, let's say, definitely EVM or Ethereum, right, is while I think there's a lot of people interested in the ecosystem, that hasn't really translated to developers or people building actual products yet. So for us to capture, let's say, a larger user base, or even just to capture a larger use case, we are slowly going to transition from just being the dev tool side of things to being a more, fully integrated block explorer, and position Celaton or less labs initially as, let's say, a explorer as a service company, similar to Etherscan and other ones that exist in other ecosystems.
Okay, so and you mentioned other ecosystem. Actually, speaking of back to competitors, right? Even in Cosmos ecosystem, there's quite a few. I think recently it's MintScan that dominate the market, right? What made you decide to let's do this? And I think somehow, probably not now or even in future, you might have to compete with MintScan. Right? What made you decide to push ahead?
So one, I think we have an advantage, right? Since a lot of our team members, including myself, have been in the Cosmos ecosystem for the last at least 3 years. So we kind of really know the tech stack, we know the community, we know the ecosystem pretty well. And in terms of the smart contract side, again, with Mirror and with being at BAN, I think we were one of the first we wrote one of the first productions Cosmos smart contracts that was ever deployed on any Cosmos chains. So again, that we know the customer, we know the tech stacks, and previously having worked on Nebula ourselves, we were definitely users of our own product as well. So we know what developers are looking for, we know what power users are looking for, and I think that's something that once we have started talking to users, starting to talk to all the other chains, we have kind of solidified that idea, and we have slowly confirmed that idea. And the other one is when it comes, let's say, for MintScan specifically. So they are definitely one, if not the top explorer on Cosmos currently, right? Especially by user metrics. But given their positioning and how they're going about their product, I think there's room for us to eventually coexist. And it might be a case where a certain group of users might prefer MintScan over us, or a different group of users might prefer us over them. Especially, I think they recently launched at least announced their MintScan 2.0, which is they seem to be going really heavily into the data analytics and on-chain analytics sort of side, rather than the development and the smart contract sort of things. So I think in the end, both product coexisting is eventually like a win-win for the end users.
Okay, I see. Thanks. Maybe I'll pause here in case you guys have any questions. That's cool. So actually, I have a few more questions. What's like, so you have a team of 10, and also like you're bootstrapping, right? What's the hardest thing right now about running a team? Yeah. Oh, actually, so what's the hardest thing right now about like running a team?
I think it's, for me, at least personally, it's kind of knowing to slowly delegate tasks away from myself, right? Since when we started Nebula, I was literally the only one in the project. So I was writing the smart contract, I was writing the front end, I was doing the hiring, I was doing the announcement, I was actually doing most of the banners for Nebula. I did it myself with Photoshop and all of that. But once we kind of hire more and more people, naturally there are things that I should focus more on than other things, and there are things that I'm better at than other things. But maybe it's just me, but I still have the tendency to try to do a lot of things myself, thinking that it's either that we can reduce the workload on the team member itself, or it can get us to whatever goal we are trying to accomplish faster. But at the end of the day, that's not going to be sustainable or scalable. And in the end, anyone, both myself and other team members, should focus on what they are really good at and what they are trying to do best. And then, believe and trust in the other team members that they can execute the rest just as well.
I see. Can you maybe elaborate on like team founding a bit? Like you mentioned you started off as a one-man show. Like who was the second person and third person that you recruited in?
So we initially, Nebula was pre-launch. So naturally, I mainly wanted help on the smart contract side, since even though I'm relatively technical, software engineering background and all of that, I'm definitely not the best developer that you're going to meet out there. And I know there's definitely people better than me, or people better suited than me to do those kind of things. So start to reach out in my network, people I've worked with before, or friends, or even friend of friends, just to see if anyone would be interested in working on the same project. And I think on that part, reaching out to a closer and a smaller network, I think is really easy and really simple in the first stages, since you don't need to, you are more confident that the people you either directly know, or the people that are referred to you, at least you have some comments from them or feedback from other people. So you don't, I guess you don't need to take as much of a chance to know that if they join your team, they will actually deliver or be able to work properly or work with you pretty well.
Okay, cool. There's a question.
Do you have some plan to monetize? Do you have some plan to monetize?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides, right, for our product. We are technically already monetizing through grants and through the deals that we have with the chains that we are supporting or will be supporting in the next couple of months. But this side is in terms of the end users, right? Since for us, I think our customers is not necessarily our users. For the end users, for the developers on the platform, at least for the time being, in the short to medium term, we will probably be mainly free. But we also have had idea, how we might be able to charge or, get people to pay for specific features, especially features that might consume more resources from us in terms of either engineering work or even maintenance costs, infrastructure costs, and stuff like that. But even with those things, I think grants and partnership with the chain themselves will probably be how we're kind of making revenue for the most part.
Okay, as you are providing this product for free as of now, how do you manage your burn rate? How do you save costs?
That's a pretty long question, but I think it's just so our burn rate kind of consists on two sides, right? In terms of the salaries and compensation. So on that part, I think we have struck a pretty good balance on a rate that's still higher in the market, that we can, but something that's still reasonable and something that we can afford. And that kind of gets us to a position where we can still maintain the team that we have, since I think that's the main competitive advantage that both myself and I think a lot of other startups and other companies have. And also, if we are in a better position and a position scale, that it needs to be a number that won't be a blocker or a restriction for us or an obstacle for us to incentivize and get other people to join our community as well. But the other part that I think is a bit better to manage, but it's a bit more nitty-gritty and finer detail, is our infrastructure cost, right? Since being an explorer, our main non-people costs come from running the infra, running our indexer, and all the backend that goes into doing this whole system. And on that part, there's a way that we are looking into kind of minimizing that, but it's also a matter of striking a deal with each of the chain that actually makes sense, then actually allow us a certain level of breathing room and a certain level of margins for us to actually do this sustainably, and that it wouldn't, negatively impact our runway or lifeline or stuff like that.
Since all the chain are still relatively new, so we kind of able to talk to them, right? Talk to them and get maybe some discount, because now every chain is like searching for users, developer, customers to be using their chain, so discount, right?
Yeah, I think this go back to what Poom said, right? I think people are generally a lot more open to talking and to reaching out on cold DMs or cold emails than I think you would have guessed. And the other one is, especially if you're building something that is either beneficial to them directly or going to be beneficial to their ecosystem, their chain, or their end users, I think they are more than happy to talk from my experience.
Reach out.
How viable do you think like running a validator node would help your cause? Because it's a long-term support for a chain, right?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, right? So how we've been doing things right now is mainly, the grants that we have kind of secure is mostly, grants and just payout in terms of, a fixed certain amount. But some chains, especially those that haven't launched yet, haven't finalized their validator set, they are also thinking of, instead of straight up handing out tokens or handing out money, they are also, a lot have been asking whether we'll be running a validator instead, and they might be providing delegations in place of that. I think on the business side, it makes sense since it provides you a relatively stable income stream. But on the other hand, I think especially for Cosmos, right, running a validator is not just a matter of running a node and maintaining a node. You need to actually participate in governance and have people keep up with chain upgrades and vote on all of that. So it, on the other hand, is also kind of drain a bit more resources. But I guess it's in the end case by case. It's definitely viable, but to what extent, I'm not really sure yet personally.
Depends on the drama level.
Yeah, mostly high in Cosmos, right?
A question around like your experience. With your experience of like working across different protocols and able to view from developer angle or founders angle and dealing with VCs and dealing with the ecosystems, throughout your experience, do you have I say, most memorable mistakes that you made and you can share with the founders in the floor?
Interesting question. I think it would have been probably early on in actually Silatone. So with Osmosis, right, although we have gotten a pretty good deal with them, I think we could have kind of figured out these small finer details and scope things out better and kind of spent more time making sure that, what we propose and what they propose actually makes sense. Since, 2 months on, even though things are generally really well and they have been a really great partner to work with, there are things that I guess we could have foreseen a bit more in terms of, how much resource, how much time, or how much, I guess, overall money or just things from our side it would take to execute on a certain idea or a certain feature. And you're never going to be perfect in terms of being able to predict everything and get everything nailed down, but it's something that we could have taken more liberty in, giving us more time to look into things and just not rushing too much into agreeing on things or thinking that, if we delay this by a week, they won't respond, or if we delay this by 2 weeks, they won't be interested in anymore. I think what I've come to kind of see is that as long as we are providing value, and as long as, we keep an active communication and still maintain a really close relationship with them, they are more than happy to kind of, take things at a slower pace, and it doesn't need to be, always as fast as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, my question from myself. Speaking of chains, right? I think we are pretty like multi-chains here. We have like different projects building on EVM or Ethereum. Then there's also some Cosmos teams. We also have Near protocol with us, and some teams are already exploring Near and BOS. I wonder from your side, like, what should we consider when, say, picking a chain, or especially like a chain that's like very different, right? Not within Cosmos ecosystem, but say between EVM and Cosmos that you're working on, or perhaps like with Near chain and so on. Like, what are the factors that we should consider?
It mainly comes down to your product and your team, I think, for the most part. As we have more and more chains with the L2 stack, with stuff like Cosmos, AppChain DCs, and OP stack and whatnot, we are starting to see more specialized chain and less of the generic L1 smart contract platform. So naturally, as this kind of continues to develop and matures, you're going to see chains that are meant for trading, right? Like Say or Solana, or chains that are meant for NFT, for infra, for stuff like that. So naturally, if you're building DeFi products, some chain might make more sense than the other. If you're building NFTs or infra, other chains might make more sense. So I think playing into your product and playing into where the chains on the network or the ecosystem that allows your product to actually shine and I guess be the best version of it that it can is probably the normal way and the best way to go. But the other one also is playing to your own teams and your own personal strengths. Since for us, right, in terms of developer adoption or in terms of user adoption overall, EVM is the easy answer. That right, it has the most user, it has the most interest. 90% of the news that you see on crypto Twitter or on the actual publications are all about Ethereum or L2s and stuff like that. But for us, that's not the thing that we are that good at, right? It's something that we can do. So we can do Solidity. We somewhat understand the EVM, but we don't really understand it deeply enough that we think that we can be the best or execute this idea or an idea the best at this time. Versus Cosmos, where we have a clear advantage both technically and in terms of the people will know the relationship that we have built and just the network that we have. So that allows us to, I guess, be ahead of the pack, ahead of other people a lot easier, and allow us to kind of differentiate ourselves and stand out in the overall space a lot more.
Okay, thank you, Tan. Any final advice for the audience?
I would say, this space has a lot of, I guess, conviction, a lot of trust in move fast and break things, to be ship things as fast as possible, to be the first and all of that. And while, speed is definitely like a differentiator in certain point, I think as both Poom and both Jade said before, I think there's always trade-off. So I think it's good to keep trying to optimize and get things to market as quickly as possible, but make sure that you're not sacrificing other things in terms of security or in terms of other aspects that you might overlook if you're just too tunnel vision and too heads down in just getting things out and not considering other things.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Tan.